Hello and good day. My name is Che Axe. I'm Director of Urban Ag and Gardening Education, and I'm here with another, hopefully somewhat valuable short workshop video, which talks about something which I think many gardeners don't really talk about. They know about it, but I think it helped me out many years ago when I was first started doing some urban farming, and hopefully it will help you out. So we're going to talk today about something called perennial crops. So there are a few perennial vegetable crops, and we're going to talk about a few of these, and hopefully these will add to your bottom line when you're selling to restaurants or farmers markets or CSAs. So starting off sometime around 2005 or 2006, I noted that the weather was very inhospitable. The weather, global warming, a lot of rain in the springtime. So I first noticed the springs were just very abnormal as far as being wet. So it would rain, and the time I wanted to get out into the garden, I would try to get out there again, and it would rain again, and it would constantly rain. So luckily I had built raised beds. So as you know, raised beds are good for drainage and things like that. So they warm up quicker, and they also drain better than having beds in the flat ground. So I had put a few of these beds in, and I had planted a few vegetable crops in the perennial vegetable. I had done asparagus, and I had done a crop of Egyptian onions, which I will talk about later. But also at the farm where I was farming at, there was a planting of rhubarb. And the folks who were there had told me that this planting of rhubarb had been there for almost 20 years or more. And they would harvest off of that every year, and it would come back every year. And I was taking crops to the farmers market, so I just started taking some of this rhubarb. Every season it would come up. I would take it early to the market. It would give me something extra early to sell and take to the market, and it worked out quite well. So we're going to talk about some of these perennial vegetable crops today. So one of the first crops I really want to talk about is asparagus. I think asparagus is one of those crops that everybody loves. Not everybody, but most people like. And it was very profitable for me at farmers market. So asparagus, the tender, tasty asparagus spears, these spears emerge from the ground in early spring, and you can harvest them when they're mature. You kind of wait a while, but you can't really harvest them the first couple of years they come up. But after the third year, you can harvest them. And it's a very valuable crop. So when the spears are getting thin and not too thick, it's a good time to really harvest these and really get them to market. So you could take a few spears from 2-year-old plants, and on the right side you see the feathery kind of growth that you get after you really harvest, and that's what you really leave to grow until the next year. So the following year, the young asparagus bed will need very, very little attention, and it will provide produce for you for decades. So the way you really do this, you prepare the soil well, double digging if you can, and remove every bit of perennial weed root that you can. That's really critical when you're growing asparagus, because asparagus does not tolerate weeds at all. So you want to have a weed-free system when you're growing asparagus. So that's the best way to do it. And it's best to grow the asparagus in sandy loam soil with a 6.0 to 7.0 pH. So you really want to add lots of organic matter. And asparagus will grow almost anywhere the ground freezes in the winter, roughly anywhere in Canada, in the United States. And it does not do too well in the deep south, but it grows very well in other places and also on the west coast. My first asparagus bed had a lot of labor in it. So, in the old days, people would dig a trench, a 6 to 8 inch trench, put the asparagus in the trench, and just, as asparagus, spread the roots out, fan the roots out of the asparagus roots. And then as the plant would start to grow, you would just cover in the trench. But they found out recently that that method, it works well, but it is very labor intensive. So, and asparagus is one of those things that you don't really grow from seed, so you have to buy the roots from a reputable supplier. So basically, the new way to really doing it is getting the bed, making it weed free, of course, first, and then set the roots out. Set the roots out, fan the roots out, only 5 to 6 inches deep in the soil, and just fan the roots out. And as the plants start to grow, then you kind of cover them up. You will need phosphorus in the soil, so using a good type of rock phosphate, or even some people use bone meal, which will really help. So basically, you set the crowns in 18 inches apart in the bed, spreading out the plant, and you fan out the roots. And when the crowns are set in the bed, fill in with about, I would say probably about 2 to 3 inches of soil. And gradually add more soil as the plants grow until the bed is level. Asparagus doesn't need tons of nitrogen, as once was thought. An annual side dressing of composted manure provides all that's probably needed. Because of the shallow roots, asparagus resents cultivation after planting, so you should carefully remove, like I said again, all perennial weeds when preparing the soil. The first season, the plant needs lots of water, about 1 inch per week. Organic mulch helps retain soil moisture and prevents and controls weeds. At harvest time, what you want to do is snip off or cut the asparagus spears below the ground. It's better to snap them off, the spears off, because when cutting you might accidentally injure a nearby spear that hasn't yet emerged from the ground. The spears will break off naturally at the transition point where the stem goes from tender to being tough. But choose thick spears about 8 inches long and pick them before the tips start to open. This is a purple asparagus, which was I grew quite a bit, and the chefs at the restaurant really liked it because it was something different that they could offer on the menu. And it tasted somewhat, to me, it tasted similar to the other type of asparagus, but it was just a novelty crop. And as I said before, after the harvest, the foliage that you saw in the first slide comes up. Don't cut it down until late winter, and then you can cut it down. And when you do cut the foliage down, just remember to destroy or eliminate it, because sometimes there are overwintering asparagus beetles and things like that. So if you do run into these asparagus beetles, you'll know when you see them. They're about 1/4 inch long, blackish insects with 3 yellow or orange squares on their wings. Or you can keep them off your plants by putting a floating row cover over the plant. This works well too. And you just have to remember to bury the row cover on the sides of the plant so the insects don't crawl under the fabric that you put on it to protect it from the insects. Another very interesting crop is Egyptian onion. So this is a somewhat odd member of the onion family. This plant forms clusters of bulbils, that's bulbils, complete with tiny curled leaves on top of their 3-foot tall plant. So the edible part, unlike the onion in the ground, with the traditional onion in the ground at the base where the soil is, this forms the edible part. Well, one part of the edible part is the bulbs at the top of the plant. So it's a very amusing plant to see really growing in the summer, where the stalks are waving around, but these bulbs are at the top, and that's the value part of the plant. So eventually the stalks fall over, sending the bulbs to their destiny in the soil. And if not harvested, these bulbs will take root and produce another ever-widening clump of plant. The mother plant is the perennial plant, though. That's the plant that comes back year after year after year. So these bulbs are, very strong in flavor, and they mature in midsummer. So you would use them the same way in culinary ways, the same way you would use shallots or onions. And they can also be also be pickled too. So one thing to remember, that all parts of this perennial onion are edible, so it doesn't form any type of underground bulb, but all parts, the stalk and the bubbles on top, are all edible. And even the leaves can be used like you would use scallion or chives. So you plant the bulbs about, when you plant the bulbs about 1 inch deep in well-drained soil that has been enriched with plenty of compost or well-rotted or aged manure, and give this plant a sunny spot and be sure that it's well watered throughout the season. So ample water makes the flavor milder. So if you want something that's a lot stronger, you use a little bit less water each week. But if you want something that's a little bit milder, so you add it, water maybe twice a week. And when you put these bulbs in the ground, you thin them to about 12 inches apart. And when the thinnings come up, you can use the thinnings for scallions. So one thing about this plant, like most perennial plants, it's good to put a layer of mulch or some type over them in the wintertime to protect them from heaving out of the ground, but also protecting, even in the summertime, protecting them from weeds in the summertime. This very interesting plant is one that you might not have heard of, but if you're in Europe or in England or France or places like that, it's a very well-known plant. It's called Good King Henry. It's probably unknown, like I said, to many U.S. gardeners, but it's a very versatile and edible perennial plant, which comes back year after year after year. So it's a beautiful plant. These very dark green, bark leaves. Some have purple tinges on them. And they come up every spring and can be cooked and eaten, and they taste similar to asparagus, believe it or not. So when these shoots come up, you can cut them off, and just don't cut too many of them off, but you can cut them off as they come up. And the leaves can be prepared like spinach. So they're the shoots that come up. You can cut the shoots off and eat those, and then the leaves come up, and the leaves can be prepared just like spinach. So as this plant gets older in the season, it kind of loses its flavor. So it becomes a little less, a little less tasty as it goes through the season. But the earliness of this plant, and having a plant that's early and you can get to it early and eat from it early, is this true appeal. So if you want to grow these plants, you can use seeds, or if you can find plants, and sow the seeds, small seeds, only 1/8 of an inch deep, and thin the mature plants to about 12 inches apart, because this is a plant that's going to grow very large over time, so you want to just make space for them to really grow. And again, I said the best harvest comes from plants grown in rich, moist soil where the plants will remain productive for many years. To prevent self-sowing of the seeds and weediness, you want to cut off the flower stalks when they come out before the seeds are dispersed. And to renew a patch rather than divide plants, just dig up the old plant and put down new seeds. That's the best way to do it. These plants last, you don't have to do this. You can do this division every 7 to 8 years. You don't need to do it like every other year. So as the plant gets bigger and bigger, if you wanted to divide in probably about the 5th or 6th year, you just pick it up, divide it, and put more seeds down, or sometimes you can divide it. So it's another valuable perennial vegetable that you can put in the garden. This is one of my favorite plants, the Jerusalem artichoke. We know the other artichoke, and there's no real relationship between them. These are called sunchokes, and believe it or not, this is the only vegetable that is indigenous to North America. There are no other vegetables indigenous to North America. Everything we eat originates some other place than North America. So it's not, when people say artichoke, you think about artichoke, the green one that you see in the store, but they're only similar in name only. Actually, this plant is related to the sunflowers. You can see the picture on the right. It looks more like a wild sunflower. So These plants can grow from 6 to 12 feet tall, and even those flowers on the right-hand side can be even used for cut flowers. So in about a month after this plant flowers and fade, the fall, the plants will turn brown and die back to the ground, and then you can dig up the tubers on the left. And the flavor is incredible. One of the things that really got me interested in this crop is because I had heard from some nutrition people that they were really looking for it, and they were referring people who were diabetic to eat this particular crop because there's something about the starch, the way the starch is built or combined in this part. It's really people who are diabetic who shouldn't have a lot of starches, they can eat this starchy plant. So that was one of the good things that I learned about it from some nutrition folks. And it does have health benefits. So when you dig the plant and you dig the tubers off, you can save the tubers. But the main thing you really want to do is, if you're going to save the tubers, you just really brush off the soil, but do not wash them off. Do not wash the tubers if you want to save them. And if you want to go back and again and plant, you just cut this tuber in pieces, and you plant the pieces of the tubers probably about 4 inches deep and about 12 inches apart in the bed. Now, the interesting thing about this plant is that this plant is a weed in some cases. Many people call it a weed. If you plant it in some place in your yard, it will take over. So what we have done in the past when we grew it here on the farm, we built a bed, a 4x8 bed, which 12-inch or 10-inch high boards, and we put down another 6 inches below that, 6 to 8 inches below that of boarding. So when the plant really wants to move and expand to new horizons and new places to grow, it really can't move out from that place. It's kind of locked in that footprint there. And so that is one of the things I must remind you about the Jerusalem artichoke. It will spread, but it's a terrific plant to grow, and it's perennial. It will come up year after year after year, and it's a very valuable perennial crop to have. Another quite interesting crop, this crop called the potato onion. Again, another perennial crop, and it's an heirloom variety, but the flavor is considerably milder than that of its cousin, the Egyptian onion. And it is a multiplying onion. It multiplies. If you put one bulb down, it produces kind of more bulbs. So the small bulbs from each bulb, plant them in. You want to plant them in well-drained soil. First of all these things need to be in well-drained soil. And you set the bulbs about 5 to 6 inches apart in beds, and you don't put them all the way deep in the soil and cover them completely with soil. You leave about 1/2 of the bulb emerging from the soil when you plant it. So potato onions produce the green bunching onions in the spring, and then a crop of large 3-inch and more diameter bulbs, as you can see in the pictures, in the fall. These store very well, and you can harvest them mature bulbs when the tops dry down. Like most onions, you wait till you can eat them green, the green part at the top, but if you want to, you can wait till the part dries down and turns brown, and then you can harvest the larger bulbs. So earlier I talked about this plant called rhubarb. I kind of learned to like it. It's never been one of my favorite crops, but it's a very nutritious crop. But again, it's another crop that's a perennial crop that you can plant in your garden. And if the rain or the kind of climate instability that we're going through now with this incessant rains, and you can't really get into your garden to really work it and plant other crops, you can rely on this crop. These, I guess, perennial security crops to come up year after year after year. So the rhubarb is another one of these crops that, but this crop takes a lot of patience to produce, because it will provide food for you for decades and decades, but it just takes a lot from the first time when you plant it to you can get reasonably good harvest off of it. But many people swear by it, many people love it, but something that you might just want to try out in a small area in your garden. So next is a plant which, again, has a different type of taste to probably people in North America, our palate, but I think it's more of a people in Europe really love this plant. In France, they love this plant. In England, they eat a lot of it. So it's a beautiful plant, but it has a sorrel. It has a fake kind of lemon taste, and it will grow on you. But it's a great addition to salads, and a very nutritious plant, a perennial plant that comes back year after year after year. But if your salads are kind of bland, you know, like many of the salads, and if you want to add something that's kind of spice it up or give it a little different flavor kick or add a little more nutritional boost to your traditional salads, sorrel is an excellent plant that you can grow because it's very unique flavor. As again I said, this plant is really prized in Europe, and one of the things about this plant that you don't really see it a lot in the store because it's extremely perishable. So you only want to really harvest this plant right when you're getting ready to use it. It's something that really doesn't ship well and doesn't really store too well either. So that's why you really don't see it available in most markets. You might see it at a farmer's market, but in most cases you very rarely would see this in the grocery store because it is extremely perishable. There's a variety called large Belleville French sorrel, which is used to make cream of sorrel soup in France, which is extremely popular. So that might be another thing that you can grow and try to use this crop. There are some other uses for it, like I said, in salads or making the soups and things like that. So if you grow these plants, I mean, you can grow them from seed or you can grow them from plants if you can find them. But these plants love rich, moist soil, and they definitely want full sun. So you space the seeds or plants about 1 foot apart. Again, this is perennial that you want to let it have the space to grow. That's not to crowd this vigorous plant. To prevent this plant from self-sowing its seeds, it will put up a flower stalk. So you want to cut that flower stalk off, and that way those seeds won't be dispersed and produce more plants. But it's great for, you can definitely harvest the outer leaves and leave the inner leaves so for the plant can continue to reproduce. So, I hope this will help you. I hope you can get some use out of this for growing some of these very fun to grow perennial crops. And you'll be a little more relaxed in the beginning of the season knowing that you will have something coming up if you can't get out to the garden and put stuff in. So enjoy and happy gardening. This is Che Axon, University of the District of Columbia, Director of Urban Ag and Gardening Education. Have a great day.